beyond the Ghostlight.
Hello, everyone.
Hey! What's going on, everybody?
Hi, everyone. I hope you all had a wonderful Sunday last week. Whether you celebrated Easter or the solstice, is that what it is? Or the spring, the pagan?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Y'all.
Whatever you celebrated, I hope it was a beautiful Sunday for you. We missed you.
I missed you guys so much. Yeah, the original body horror story, right? You know, all the fun stuff. 3 days waiting period. It was it's a good time. Yeah. Definitely. Easter, everybody, or Ostara, or pagan holiday, or etc., etc. Just a nice Sunday off.
Absolutely. Nick, you want to tell us a little bit about what the theme is for this episode for those out there who might not know?
Okay, so today, even though we're a week off of our normal schedule, you know, we're still going to be thinking about spring. And spring obviously is about new life. And new life comes with new flesh. And new life, new flesh kind of makes me think of, you know, the horror of the body. And so we thought we'd talk about body horror. And to do that, we have an expert on the kind of movies that deal with a lot of body horror. And we will introduce her first. But let's say hello, Tori. Hello, Luna.
Nick. Yeah, real quickly, has anybody seen any new body horror movies recently, or revisited anything in the last couple weeks since we chatted?
Well, the poster I have behind me is one of the classics of body horror, Eyes Without a Face. This is actually an interesting poster because I love posters from other markets, especially the Asian market. Anyone who knows me can go and find my post about the joys of the Spawn posters that were done for the Chinese market, where he's basically like my big monster boyfriend, which is an animated movie I think needs to be made. Spawn as the boyfriend.
I think that would be the cutest. Just, you know, Spawn frolicking, Spawn going out on a first date, Spawn, you know, learning how to use the dating apps. I'm for it. I feel like this needs to be a series now.
I know, and you know, there's also the tongue for, you know, Spawn After Dark. So it's a delightful thing. Anyway, so this is Eyes Without a Face, which is a 1960s movie about absolutely disgusting things happening to replace someone's face. The only thing she has are her eyes. If you've never seen it, I really recommend it. And it's how it was advertised and done in the non-French speaking markets.
I like it. I think it's a lot of fun, and good recommendation right off the bat. Now, I know our special guest can throw down an amazing number of recommendations for us, and I am so stoked to have her with us. So, do we want to go ahead, Nick, and introduce the one and only Michelle to the rest of the chat?
Yes, absolutely. So Michelle Kisner is a Detroit-based film critic, lover of all things weird, wonderful, culty, horrific, and, you know, also a lover of Asian cinema. And, yay! And we'll actually cover that and try and combine all of that as we're talking. And people, ask your questions.
Please
Because
bring us.
I know that you can do that. Because we have questions, but we love the audience. So let's bring Michelle on.
Woo!
Hi.
Hello, Michelle.
Welcome aboard the Ibis train. We're glad that you are with us here. Nick, do you want to go ahead and start us off with our first question of the night?
Oh yes, absolutely. So Michelle, you're a huge fucking weeb.
It's true.
It's true. Which is one of the things that we both enjoy talking about. So let's talk about how horror differs between the West, mostly American inspired cinema, and and that which comes from Japan, and in fact wider Asian concepts of horror.
Well, I think the main difference that and it's interesting because as time has gone on, because there was like this boom of like Asian horror being like localized and brought over to the West. Like it kind of started in the late 90s to early 2000s. There was like this huge influx of like J horror, as everybody was calling it, and everybody was like, it like came out of nowhere to people in the West, including myself. Like 1999, I was like 18. And this is in the olden days where like you didn't have as much internet coverage of everything, and I was like buying bootlegs off of eBay because like there was literally no way to like watch any of this stuff, and the internet was bad, so it would like take you like a whole day to download one movie. So there was like this influx of like J horror. So as it's progressed, J horror has actually started to incorporate Western elements into some of their films to like appease a wider global audience. But if you watch more classic Japanese horror, and also like Hong Kong and also Korean horror, they're very similar in the idea of Asian horror, and Asian films in general are more interested in the space between events than the events themselves. It's like the easiest way I can explain it. They're interested in atmosphere, more tone, a feeling of dread. They make movies that like leave you with a feeling of horror and unrest after you watch them. American horror films, and I'm not saying one is better than the other, I'm just contrasting differences. American films are more interested in the jump scare. They're more interested in the gotcha moment to elicit fear. So like a really good example is if you watch the original Ringu, Japanese film, and then you watch, I think Gore Verbinski did the remake. They're very different mood wise. Like Ringu is very atmospheric. It's like it also plays around a lot with like glitch in video, the idea of tapes and like low resolution stuff. And then when Gore Verbinski remade it, and actually I thought he did kind of a pretty good job of westernizing it and still keeping some of like what makes that movie effective, but he was very into the jump scare side of it. Like there's a scene where the girl opens the closet door and her friend's in there and she's been dead for like days, and they zoom in on her face real quick, like smash cuts, that kind of thing. That's very common in American horror, whereas Japanese horror is more delicate. It's delicate, it's soft, it's haunting. They like to make movies about demons and ghosts and generations being haunted by families perpetuating horror upon each other. And a lot of their horror comes from this like feeling, this they want to they don't want people to, I don't know how to explain it. It's kind of hard. It's a more delicate, softer type of a horror. And then it actually transitioned in the mid 2000s to like American style horror because it got so popular that they started bringing other elements in to make it more palatable to Western audiences. But now I feel like people are, the entire like consciousness of like people understand Eastern sensibility a little bit more. So now they can make their own films again, and they still make a lot of money when they come, over to the West, because we understand Eastern sensibility a little bit better now.
Sure. Yeah, I couldn't help but stalking your feed a couple days ago, and I saw that you rewatched Tokyo Gore Police, which is one of my absolute favorites. blood drenching. I think on that cusp, right? Because that's like 2004, 5. Isn't that like it's early 2000s?
Yeah, I think it's like 2007 or something like that. Yeah.
Okay, maybe I'm thinking a little later, right? So, but you're like starting to see that transition from like that's obviously a more of a blood flick than like atmosphere as character, atmosphere as and some of the generational trauma stuff that you're referring to, that plays a lot of in culture, but it does it in a different way, right? Where society is kind of affected by some of those, the unspoken evils, right? In the horror flick, and then you get to just enjoy the gore fest that's happening. Can I ask you how does body horror in the focus, how does it affect storytelling, right? So like if you're watching something like Tokyo Gore Police, how does it kind of take it to that next level for storytelling, where adding the extra over the top kind of gore gives us kind of a connection that maybe we wouldn't have with, say, something that's a little bit more tamed down or even westernized,
Yeah. So the interesting thing about Tokyo Gore Police is it's an attempt to be shocking, to be subversive, and it's very much in like an indie type of a film, and it's and as much as it's like you get like lured in, and a lot of what made Tokyo Gore Police very infamous was all this gore and the blood. The blood squirts out like there's like a hose like in your neck, and it's like shooting out. But it's also a story about like suicide, and suicide's a big deal in Japan. I mean, like we know about things like suicide forests, but they have quite a high suicide rate because of societal pressures and whatnot. And Tokyo Gore Police actually is like this really dark humor going through the middle of it, where it's like satirizing the Japanese obsession with suicide. And like there's these weird fake commercials, kind of like RoboCop style, or like what's the movie with the giant bugs? I can't think of it right now. In space.
Starship Trooper.
Yeah, it's very Starship Trooper-esque with like these like ads. And there's like an ad where there's like these girls and they have like box cutters, but it's like they're scented, and if you cut yourself and you lick your blood, it's tasty. Yeah, kill yourself. Yay, yay, yay. It's like weird stuff like that, but it's very obsessed with like satirizing Japanese society and all these like these elements of it. But then it mixes body horror, and like it's very sexual too. It's like a very fetishistic S&M tinged film, where like one of the main characters is a girl with all her limbs cut off, and she has like a gimp mask on, and she walks around, and she's like the head of police dog, but he also like sleeps with her obviously too. It's very sexually tinged. There's like this incredible sequence I absolutely love towards the middle, where they go to a sex club where everybody is like mutilated and body modification, to the point where there's one woman who's literally been flayed alive, and she's been made into a chair, and she has no head, and like one of the best parts of her performance is she pees on everybody, and everybody's like yay, and it's like insane. Yes. But it's insane in a way that I feel like they like in Japanese films, they like to play around with distorting the sense of self, because I mean I've actually been to Japan, and as much as it's like a kind of like a reaction to how tight the society is, because everything in society is very regimented. You don't do certain things, you don't do this, everybody's working together to kind of have a whole, but there are things you don't do. Like everybody's very, like you go on a subway, you can't look somebody in the eye, you can't stare at people. You're very cognizant of everybody else. And then these Japanese gore films, there's none of that. It's just wild, free sex, gore. I feel like the more buttoned up a society is, like the more outlandish their horror is, and also their pornography as well. And Japanese pornography is there's some very crazy stuff out there. So yeah, I feel like it's this interesting dichotomy between like how their normal life and then what they want as fantasy or as escapism.
Right, from the normal restrictions, like of everyday life. And I think that's so interesting. So One of the observation I think you made it was that Ai Shiina is one of the main actresses in Tokyo Gore Release, and she's also in one of my personal favorite movies, The Audition, which is the one that I usually recommend to people who really want to get messed up and who don't like eye stuff. So I'm curious about that because that one for me feels like one of those kind of environment-based films, right? But still, and parallels the same kind of thing, though, where again, there's that element of revenge, violation. The pornographic element is still there, but it's a kind of a different way of approaching it, which I think is equally as shocking, maybe just in a very different way.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you have thoughts about that, or just sort of again that kind of time period?
Yeah. So Audition is interesting. And I hope some people watching this, if you haven't seen Audition, I'm gonna spoil a little bit of it. So sorry. Maybe you could just like turn the sound off or something. But the twist in Audition is pretty well known. I actually saw it when it came out. And I had to get go to old eBay Joe and get the bootleg, and I had no idea what it was about. I just knew Takashi Miike is my favorite. Whatever he makes, I just buy it. Blind buy.
Yep.
So the premise of Audition, for people that don't know, is that a guy is like going through a divorce and he's single again, and he's trying to find a new girlfriend. And his friend is like, "Hey, we'll have a fake audition for like a show, but you're really gonna use this audition to find yourself a girlfriend." So he's like auditioning all these different women, and like for this fake show, but actually in actuality he's just sussing through women to get a girl, right?
Yep.
It's an interesting deconstruction of the stereotype of the timid Asian woman, the submissive Asian woman too, because a lot of times people they think that Asian women are submissive. They're taught to be coy and polite and all this kind of thing. And Asami, the girl that he ends up picking, he picks her because of this. He picks her because she's very withdrawn, she's shy, and that's attractive to him. But it turns out that she's like been abused, and she's murderous. And the previous person she was with, there's an absolutely beautiful moment in the middle. The entire movie is played like a romance film until the halfway point, when you see he's calling Asami, but she's not answering the phone, and she's looking at the floor, and there's a bag behind her, and all of a sudden the bag jumps.
What's in the bag?
And it's an absolutely incredible like twist, and it's played so perfectly because the two halves of the movies are both exemplary like versions of their respective genre. So like the romance part is done really well, to the point where like if you didn't know that it was a horror movie, you'd think it was a romance movie. But then when Miike switches to the horror, it's like pitch perfect, and it's even more effective because of the rug pull that he does with the first half.
Right. Because you actually kind of feel for the guy. Like, it's creepy. Yeah. And everything he's doing is awful. Yeah. And you're like, he's kind of, yeah. It's great. I was, curious about that. So thank you. I appreciate that you sharing that, because those are two of my absolute favorites. And they seem very different from each other, but telling a very similar story. So thanks.
Perfect. These segues, these natural segues, just I can't even with my whole life right now. So we just spent a good amount of time talking about the Eastern culture. So would you say that there are any Western creators who come close to the Asian aesthetic in horror currently, and maybe vice versa?
You guys, like this question I pondered. It's kind of hard. Like I was really trying to think of Western. It's a lot of Western directors, they don't really take from Asian horror. They take from action, I noticed, more so. Just, the stylish action. I was trying to think like maybe like Robert Eggers. Like he's got this kind of like atmospheric aesthetic that's very like, it's more about what's happening in between things. Maybe the movie Hereditary also, I feel like it could be an Asian horror film, because a lot of Asian horror films, especially Korean ones specifically, they like to deal with family drama, and they will put a very good family drama storyline smack dab in the middle of like a ghost story, and it's like very compelling. and they rely much more on emotional characters. I feel like especially Korean horror, they're just the masters of establishing mood, establishing character arcs, making characters that you care about. Like you really don't want anything bad to happen to these people, as opposed to American horror films. They usually make them the most annoying people possible. So you're like, please, Lord Jesus, somebody kill these people like 10 minutes ago. But yeah, I had a hard time thinking of like, Western that use Eastern aesthetic. But on the flip side, as far as American or like Eastern directors, I would say like Takashi Miike especially is very much like incorporates Western elements into his films. He just makes so many movies. Like he's made like over like 100. Like he makes so many movies and he's just been around so long and he also has done movies here and like, so I'm trying to think of the director that did Stoker. He made Stoker, which was
he did what else did he do?
The Handmaiden.
Yeah, Stoker is really good but Stoker is good because of some of those other dynamics.
Mhm.
The piano scene where they're playing piano, and it's not explicit, but like the atmosphere of it absolutely is.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's a wonderful performance by both of the people in that because it sells it so well. Yeah.
Is it Park Chan Wook? Is that who it is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you do see that a lot with there's like this interesting, subgenre of Asian directors making Western films in English for the first time. And they always have this very strange but intriguing stilted quality to them because, they're going through a lot of layers of translation, right? Sometimes they're even like in the case of like, say, Snowpiercer, for example. Snowpiercer is based on a French comic, and then it's made by a Korean director. And then he used English actors, like, American English actors. So like there's all these layers of translation it's going through that the end product becomes this like just mishmash of interesting things. Though it's kind of like fusion food, right? Like it's like it's little elements of everything combined and makes a new dish, and it's interesting. I always seek out like, a lot of Asian directors' first English films because they always have this kind of like weird ethereal quality to them while they're figuring out how to tell a story in a language that's not their first language,
Right.
I always find it fascinating.
Yeah. No. Very
Thank you.
interesting. Thanks.
Yeah, no, I mean, I also love that you brought up Hereditary because that is the atmosphere thing in that. And it's a lot of shadowy stuff too. You know what I mean? Like the importance of lighting and the importance of shadows and location. That works, really well. And since we're doing this, we're talking about like all these different movies and we're mentioning those, we've been bringing up movies which I think are well known, although Stoker not so much. But I think it's great for people to learn about movies and to learn about new movies to them. So what are some gems that you think, you don't get that people may not have heard of, but that they should really check out because they're good, exemplary movies of that kind of thing, or are just recommended and people may not have heard of?
One of the movies I was thinking of was Society, which is directed by Brian Yuzuna. I think I'm saying his name incorrectly. But Society is like an 80s body horror film in which the protagonist lives in like a affluent area and everybody's rich. But whenever I think his family like just moved there, and then everybody he meets is like off and strange. He notices that there's some kind of like secret society that's going on in the background of all these rich people. And then it turns out that there's some weird, demonic alien force, and all these rich people once a year get together and they do what's called a shunting. And shunting is they all melt together in a giant blob of people, and all their body parts melt together, and they just become this giant blob of like rich people, and then they pick one person and they eat them. Like they just like absorb his essence, and so it ends up obviously being the protagonist. So we can see the shunting, and the shunting. So Brian Yuzna is like very much like a special effects guy, and he actually did special effects for other stuff, and then he was like directing films. And the practical effects in this film are some of the best I've ever seen. It's like the grossest shit. Like just everybody melts together, and then like there's like a very this is probably people seen this like clips of this, but there's a guy where he melds his body in such a way that his like face comes out of his ass, and like he's like talking, there's like butt cheeks right here, and like where his anus would be is his mouth, and he's like talking and stuff, and there's like feet on the side of his head. It's like very sexual too. The shunting has a super sexual element to it. Like it's like basically an orgy, but instead of like, you know, coming together sexually, you actually like literally physically meld your bodies together and have sex that way, to like where you're just all this big blob of orgasmic, like fleshy mass.
Yeah, did that predate the whole thing with Deep Space Nine, or is it not? Because it's very much like the founders in Deep Space Nine, because they all belong to that one river, basically, and then occasionally a blob will exit and take on a sort of vaguely humanoid form and do that. And then there's also that ad, and it's not an ad. It was never. I don't think it was ever an actual ad, but it's a parody of like Capri Sun things, which people may have seen online, where the kids become the silver blobs, and they travel as the silver blobs to play like softball or something. But when they reform, they're all just horrendous combined creatures that have to be destroyed. I love that general aesthetic. It's just it's logical. It makes sense. You know,
pick your favorite Cronenberg, you know, blob, you know, and see what that kind of looks like, but in silver, you know.
Yeah.
yeah.
And that's actually kind of my next question is, you know, so CGI obviously has got a lot of interesting things happening for us with body horror. We can create a lot of interesting stuff, right? And I'm curious for you, like how do you feel? Maybe some CGI examples are good of some fun body horror, maybe like the zombie genre, because that's usually CGI'd pretty well or done really well in practicals. And I kind of like to add on to it, maybe some examples of your also like favorite practicals. I know you just gave us the Society, but you know, maybe giving us some of the best of both, in your opinion.
It's actually hard for me to think of good CGI. I'm actually kind of really don't like it. I mean, I understand it serves a purpose, but I feel like it just doesn't have this like organic, tangible quality that practical does, and it also doesn't age as well. Like if you watch every 10 years, like if you watch a movie from 10 years ago with CGI, it looks like crap, and then 10 years from now, the movie we made now, they're gonna look like crap. Like it just ages terribly. Trying to think of a good CGI one.
I think Jurassic Park maybe is like the good, but that's like not body horror, you know?
Yeah. And they mixed a lot of it with practical, which is why it kind of like works. And every time they had dinosaurs in CGI, they were like far away kind of, and like all their up close, like when people were interacting, it was like, you know, practical. Yeah, I honestly can't think of really any good CGI ones, to be honest. It just looks really fake to me, you know. It never looks good. I mean, it's watchable, but it just never, like if you watch The Thing, which is probably like the creme de la creme of like practical work. It looks good now, and that movie came out like 1981. If you show somebody The Thing now and they've never seen it, they are enthralled. I've done it like numerous times. In fact, show people The Thing, they've never seen it, they're like, "Wow, this was made in 1981." I'm like, "Yeah," because but you know, we kind of don't have the people now that can work with practical in that same way. Like there are people that literally spent decades of their life learning that practice, and now it's kind of, they have to like really find somebody that can do it, when back then there was tons of people that they could draw from. But if you watch like The Thing's like a really good example of a body horror movie, one of the best ones, and it's because of that. It's because of that tangible, just gooey. It's there. Like those things are there. They're on the film in real life. You know, it makes it more relatable. I feel like your brain just processes it a little bit differently because your brain knows that's a real thing that existed, and they filmed it, and it's tangible, and the actors can touch it and feel it, and the actors are also really looking at those effects when they're acting, right? They're not just looking at a ball on a stick or whatever, or a guy in a green suit or something like that. It's a thing that they're looking at, and it's gross, and they can like act accordingly.
Feel it, yeah.
I'm trying to think of like other good. Tetsuo the Iron Man has fantastic practical makeup work. And that's like an interesting kind of intersection of body horror and biopunk, which is kind of like this offshoot of body horror, where it's like body horror also with like a technological, like industrial kind of aesthetic kind of thrown in there with like metal. And the movie's very interested in how metal, man and metal, collide and what happens, and the organic versus the inorganic, and like, infectious wounds and steel in them, and it's just fantastic. And that was like done on like a shoestring budget too. Like it was, another movie I think has good practical effects. It's also new is Possessor, which is directed by Brandon Cronenberg, which is David Cronenberg's son. That movie was very much like kind of like underrated last year. Came out a little bit under the radar. But and there's interesting, like, David Cronenberg obviously is like one of the kings of body horror. Like if you say body horror, he's like the first name that comes up. And I was interested that his son was making movies, because I was like, well, is his son going to be like, Kroger brand Cronenberg, right? Is he going to try to like be like his dad? But but the interesting thing about him that he is like his dad, but he's not. He's more interested in mind horror, as I like to call it. It's like body horror, but it's all psychological, right? And then Possessor, there's actually somebody taking over the bodies of other people, and there's this horror of not being in your own self, and it actually affects the protagonist quite a bit, to the point where she's basically an assassin that takes over people's bodies and conducts murders through their body, and then leaves their body once she's done the murder. Like they have like this machine, kind of like Inception-esque looking machine that she hooks up to, and she like hijacks bodies and then uses those bodies to murder people, and then comes out the body. But in this process of doing that, she's losing her sense of self, and she experiences extreme body horror every time she switches, right? Because she's just in this body, like they literally have to brief her on what the body's like this guy has IBS, or this person has pains, or they're sick with this, because she has to like experience this complete destruction of herself, and she only has her mind. And it also is very interested in, I would say it's not the focal point, but also gender, because she is a cis female, and in the course of this film, she hijacks a male body, and she's very kind of like interested in this difference. And there's like this incredible sex scene where they show her, because the person she hijacked, she has to stay in her body undetected for a while to get to the point where she can murder somebody. And she's having sex with his girlfriend as him. And like, they kind of like phase her in and out of like, she's like, because she's having sex, she's having the pleasures making her lose control of the body momentarily from time to time. And it's amazing. Like they phase her, like they put her face, like she's like basically orgasming, and they put her face there, but she has the penis of the man. And it's like, it's fantastically done. It's like explores it in a way that's not like offensive. It's different to her. Like she's experiencing sex as a man, but she has her mind still. But that's like a fantastic body horror movie where at some point in the film, she loses control of the body, but she's trapped inside the mind. So like the guy kind of wrestles his body back from her for a little bit, and she's trapped inside of his head, but with his body, and he's doing stuff, and she can't stop him, but she can't she can't get out of his body anymore. And there's like this crazy scene where they visualize this by him putting he puts a mask on of her face, like they made a cast of her face, and he like stretches it over his face, like he's like wresting control back of her body, and like it's all distorted, and the eyes don't fit right, and he's like, they used it in all the promo shots because it's like it's very compelling and intriguing idea of like being trapped. That's why I say Brandon Cronenberg is more interested in mind horror. I mean, he still does the body horror thing, but he's more interested in the psychological effects of your body not being your own, loss of agency, kind of that kind of thing, which I think body horror, the biggest thing of body horror is loss of agency. You're not in control of your own body anymore. There are outside forces distorting it, and you can't stop them.
That is very interesting. So that actually brings us to our next question, but I kind of want to segue into that next question with something that we had talked about. The three of us had talked about a little bit a couple days ago at one of our meetings. We were talking about body horror, right? And like what movies we consider it are and aren't body horror. And one that I brought up was Get Out as a body horror movie. And we didn't really have a debate about it because I think we all agreed that it was, but we discussed it for a little bit about the idea of like that is the purest form of horror, right? Like your body being taken from you is just it's an incredible way to look at it, and it really it takes it to the point where it's kind of taking society and looking at it as a microcosm, right? And it's exploring things that we experience as a whole in these small horrific situations. So the Ibis, we are a Theater of Shadows company, which means that we strive to create work that heals by looking at our shadows. So we try to do shadow work with the art that we do, right? So with body horror, you're literally pulling apart the sinews of humanity, right? In our vision statement, in our mission statement, we say we pull apart the sinews of humanity to examine who we are and what makes us tick. So that's what you're literally doing in body horror. So would you say that body horror can be its own version of shadow work? And if so, in what way?
Well, I think, you hit the nail on the head with the idea that, transformation doesn't always have to be bad. You could think of like maybe like a butterfly. It could be body horror because it's like a caterpillar, right? And it's just enjoying caterpillar life, and all of a sudden it gets trapped in a cocoon and it comes out and it's completely different. But the thing it becomes is like beautiful. I think body horror is a way to explore like how fragile a human is, how fragile flesh is, and you can maybe transform into something different, and that could be scary, but maybe what you transform into is like actually your true form, and you were just scared to acknowledge that's who you were the entire time. I don't want to like, so a lot of body horror is obviously playing on the idea of like it's scary stuff. Like a lot of body horror kind of will dabble into things like diseases, and I think maybe like the pandemic we've been living through, a lot of people have been going through body horror on a global scale because everybody's scared of every little thing your body does now, every little change, every little sniffle. You're scared you have COVID, right? That's just the thing that we've all been going through. That's a type of body horror, in my opinion. And a lot of movies use disease as body horror. But I think exploring changing and metamorphosis can be like, it can be illuminating to you and show you sides of yourself you didn't know could exist. And then now that they do exist, and maybe you can accept them. A lot of body horror movies obviously aren't trying to be positive. It's hard to be positive like in a horror movie all the time, but the idea of it, I think, can be interesting if you take it to the ultimate end of body horror, which is metamorphosis into a new thing, and maybe this new thing is better, and maybe the new thing is something that you needed to become at some point.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with the caterpillar too, for a brief moment with the caterpillar, it genuinely is that body horror because it isn't like the caterpillar has the wings already. It has the pattern for the wings, but when it builds the cocoon, it basically liquefies. So, for a brief moment, the caterpillar is nothing but a tiny caterpillar stroke butterfly brain floating around in goo which it then redesigns and reforms into the butterfly body. So that's a really, really great metaphor because it is when you know what metamorphosis is for a caterpillar, it is absolutely disgustingly horrifying.
So pretty and yet scary at the same time. I love that you brought up the thing already. And we're gonna have to segue to one of my favorites. Everybody who knows me knows that I am the absolute fan of all things xenomorph. I love Alien. I love aliens. I love Ripley. So I wanted to bring up a couple more friends of mine. We're having a debate on Facebook. So I just really want to quickly shout out Doy. What up? We're about to answer this one right now. So in your opinion, between three classics of the 80s classics, some of the best examples I think too of practical body horror, Alien, The Thing, and Predator. Which is your favorite? Maybe. And let's go from that. Like, which is your favorite maybe example of body horror versus like, and then let me just throw out there which one do you think is the best movie?
Out of those three, it's definitely going to be The Thing for me.
Cool.
I'm just a huge Carpenter fan, and I love his meat and potatoes kind of approach to, horror. The interesting thing about The Thing is when it first came out, it was not critically acclaimed at all.
Right.
First off, people were just like, what in the name of Jesus am I looking at? Like, they really didn't do body horror like that before. Like, it was like blowing people's minds, basically. It was so grotesque and disgusting and new and like just horrible that they had no idea how to mentally process what was happening. It was off-putting to many, many, many critics. It's interesting, like acclaimed movies now, it's always fun to go look back at when they came out, what critics thought, especially movies that were ahead of their time, which The Thing was. They did such a good job with the practical work on it that critics couldn't even pay attention to the story. It was just so gross to them. Like it was just gross and they couldn't handle it. But The Thing is like a great story too, because it's a good story on how men or people in general don't trust each other. Humans are not inclined to trust. And one of the most iconic scenes is when they're all tied up and they're testing everybody's blood to see who's the thing. And it's like one of the most just spine tingling, like edge your seat, nail biting, just like who's the thing. And it's just this. There's actually also, I'm getting a little bit off topic, but there's like this really cool short story that somebody wrote that's from the viewpoint of the Thing, of the alien monster, that you can find online. It's fantastic. It's entirely from the view of the alien and why the alien's doing what it's doing. And it's actually like makes you feel sorry for it, kind of, because it's just trying to like live like they're trying to live. But obviously the way it lives isn't like congruent with what makes people live, because it has to like take over your cellular everything. I do like Alien a lot though. And Alien's like, that's a really good example of something that you wouldn't think is body horror if you just explain it to somebody, but when you watch it, it is.
Right.
It's more like Alien. A lot of it, I feel like, is based on it's kind of like sexual assault also, because when the face hugger grabs onto you, actually inserts something into you and impregnates you. And all the aliens are very like phallic looking. They got the penis looking heads and all that kind of stuff. It's very sexual, phallic, and it's fear of sexual assault, loss of agency, loss of sexual agency. And you can, and it's very, you can like even contrast it with like, the idea of it makes men think about what it's like to be impregnated and you can't stop it and you can't fix it, right? So let's, we can kind of segue even like an abortion kind of debate there, where like, what if it was you and something impregnated you and you didn't want it? Like, they don't have that fear very often, but Aliens puts that fear into them of like, just it's and then you grow it and then it comes out of you, bursts out. Like that's super body horror to me. Like, it's very gross to me. Like just thinking about like aliens growing inside of you and bursting out of your stomach. And I also like Predator. Predator's just a kick-ass action movie. I mean, that's like one of the tops. Like it's just there's no there's no fat on that movie. It's just all gristle and meat and just dudes in the jungle and the things hunting them and they gotta survive. Yeah, it's like super masculine action film that they really only really made in the 80s. Like 80s action films just have this like homoerotic masculine quality that they don't make anymore. They were so homoerotic and like nobody noticed apparently until like 10 years later, like, hey, like Predators, like that whole like the two arms, handshake or like, oh, I haven't seen it in a while. It's just like y'all was dating, weren't you? You were dating. Like it would this is everybody sweating and rubbing muscles on each other and like, I love you, man. And, like,
now, careful, Zack Snyder is gonna hear you from out there, and he's gonna take that challenge on, babes.
But yeah, that's a whole other show. Is just talking about how homoerotic 80s action movies are. It's like fabulous. I love it. Or like Top Gun. That's like one of the gayest movies ever. And like ever. Like, and you watch it now, you're like, wow, like that is very gay. I love it. Like.
It's true, right? And I think it's amazing to me now. Like, you see some of those like themes now. About. Especially in the broier, 80s films, and you just see so many layers in the coding now. It's fascinating to me, and I think you're absolutely right with the penetrative aspect of Aliens, kind of again flipping a script to a perspective we've never thought of before. Similar with like The Thing, again, this feeling of helplessness and absolute gore that just. It was invasive, right? Nobody had seen it until that moment. And it's kind of the same with Predator. These very like penetrative dude movies that kind of flip the script on how men think about their bodies, in general. So I'm just very, very curious about like what's your personal favorite between all of them. But I think you're actually right. I think they have Predator the most, and I probably would say The Thing the least, but there is that essence of questioning gender and questioning sexuality in each of them that I think is fascinating. So, so thanks for your hot take. So The Thing wins, everybody. Yeah.
Beautiful. So we do have one last question that we'd like to ask you. And we ask everybody this question. It's like the linchpin question. What made you fall in love with horror? And you can make it specifically body horror if you'd like.
Actually, so I had like an interesting childhood where I was not told I couldn't watch things. Some kids, like, you grow up and you're like, oh, it's too scary, it's R-rated. I had no such restrictions. Both my parents realized at an early age I could understand that it's fake. And so one of my favorite pastimes with my dad was we literally watched every horror movie that ever came out. Like, and I was like 7 or 8 watching, like Hellraiser and stuff like that. Like, there were no restrictions. I watched R-rated stuff, didn't matter. But like, he literally just sat me down and was like, that's a guy in makeup, or like, that's all fake. And I was like, oh, okay. And then, they still scared me, because I'm a kid, but not to like a soul scary point, like nightmares or anything like that. But yeah, my dad is absolutely 100% why I'm into film as much as I am. And he actually passed away like 5 years ago. But even like when we, as an adult, he always, his favorite thing would do was like email me what was out that week in the movies, all the horror movies that were coming out. And he said, we'd say, Michelle, you seen this one? Michelle, you seen this one? We talk about that a lot. But it was definitely him. My dad was obsessed with horror, especially. I also got into reading horror because of his extensive book collection. That's why Stephen King's my favorite horror writer, is because my dad had like every Stephen King book, and I literally just read every book that he had. And then, so I was a huge fan of Stephen King. It just something about horror always just fascinates me. I've always been drawn to like weird, darker things, even as a child. Like my mom said, I was obsessed with like like medieval torture devices. I would like get books from the library on them, and she'd like be like, "Why are you reading?" Like they were worried maybe I was like something was wrong with me. But I'm actually generally like a very cheerful, optimistic person. It's very much at odds with like my movie watching, which is I collect exploitation films, I collect grindhouse, I collect B movies, cult movies. I have some of the grossest movies like ever. Like I have a lot of stuff that I've been collecting since the mid 90s. You know, like really dark stuff. But in my day-to-day life, I do not feel that way. Like I feel like I always call myself a you know, optimistic, like, you know, nihilist. Like I'm okay with everything, you know. Like I'm not depressed or anything like that. It's just for some reason horror like fascinates me, like death and gruesome and gore and blood and ghosts and demons. It's all super fascinating to me.
So that actually brings up an interesting question. What's the most disgusting movie you own, would you say?
This well, I would say, you know, I have the guinea pig movies. Those are infamous set of films from Japan where have you ever heard that story of Charlie Sheen? And he saw a movie with a samurai dismembering somebody and he thought it was real because it was like a bootleg, so they took the credits weren't on it. And that's actually that's one of the guinea pig films. It's called Flowers of Flesh and Blood, and it has the entire film is just a samurai serial killer that abducts a woman and he straps her to a table and he gives her like a sedative to where she's like not lucid but she's not like asleep, and he systematically cuts all of her arms and legs off and like he plants them in like these pots. But apparently Charlie Sheen like saw it, and like at a party somebody put it on and it was just like a boot of a boot of a boot of a boot, like on a tape, like back in the day like it used to be, and he literally thought somebody like really got murdered, like it was a snuff film, and he called the police and like they had to like they tracked them down like in Japan, the people that made the guinea pig series, and they were like had to show their behind the scenes stuff like no, it's fake, like this isn't actually like real.
That's really good special effects makeup then if you got people.
Honestly, like when I watched it, you know, at the first time I watched it, when I heard that Charlie Sheen story, I'm like, he must have been higher on coke or something. Oh. There's like edits in it and shit. Like there's like edits and like changing, you know, cameras and stuff. I'm like, did he think this was the greatest edited like snuff video ever? Like they had lighting changes and shit, like costume changes. I'm like, bro, I don't know.
Boy.
When I'm filming my murders, I like to have a good crew, and I make sure that they're union. Because I may be a serial killer, but I care about my stuff.
Hey, Michelle lighting is on point, all right? You know, it's important.
I mean, I can run the risk of the police, but SAG-AFTRA?
Yeah.
No.
But you know, I have like, you know, some of the more classic like exploitation stuff like Sallow, which is like which is actually absolutely fantastic film that is just hideous to watch, but it's artistically one of the most important films I think that were made. A Serbian film, I have that, which is another infamous I don't like this term. I feel like it's kind of like reductive, but torture porn is what the genre that would be. Martyrs is another one that's and actually Martyrs is a body horror film. It's like religious body horror. I don't know if you guys seen Martyrs, but the basic premise is it's like somebody there's like these people that kidnap women, and they think the way to achieve transcendence like spiritually is by pain, which actually like a lot of religions that's a thing, like, you know, people what they call flagellating yourself, like, you know, hitting yourself with stuff, hurting yourself because pain is transcendence. They take it to the ultimate level where they kidnap a girl and they torture them to the point that they transcend, and then they talk to them and ask them what they see. They're basically trying to hear the voice of God, to see God. And in this film, they kidnap somebody, and at the end of the film, they end up flaying her alive. They skin her, but she's not dead, So she's completely skinned, and she's experiencing so much pain that she transcends spiritually, and they talk to her and ask her stuff. And like the whole point of the movie is like, what did she say and this kind of stuff. But yeah, I have a lot of stuff that I probably couldn't even talk about, to be honest. But I like to, I collect it for it to exist. I guess a lot of media, especially now, we're going into a period where I feel like a lot of media might be lost to time because everything's going digital. But
Right.
you know, a lot of you only get what the corporations want you to be on digital, right? You only get what they want to put on streaming or all these things. So I collect these films so that they have a home, and then maybe I can pass them to somebody else, and they're just not lost to time, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
No, it's important, absolutely. And I, you know, to cinephiles everywhere, like to have a record, you know, so that that's not just Shudder or like the fun stuff they put on, you know, like the streaming services, like to actually have a copy of these things, and they're getting harder and harder to find. It's interesting that you mentioned that. Like after your post was like, I'm curious to see, you know, like where's Tokyo Gore Police and who has it right now. And it's not available on any of the streaming services. And I thought that was very interesting just to see. So yeah, that's a really great point. And so thanks for hanging on to the hard copies, man.
Yeah, you can also see this with things like there are some things which I can only find on like YouTube, and for ages that was the only place I could find them because like Disney Plus does not have The Watcher in the Woods, which The Watcher in the Woods was like one of the first spooky, weird, atmospheric movies, right? That I remember watching. And you would think it would be a thing that would be on streaming because it's not that terrifying, but it's atmospheric, but it's not on Disney Plus. So you have to go to YouTube to actually watch this thing. And then there was apparently a Lifetime version done like a few years ago.
The good stuff. The good stuff.
And YouTube's actually a terrible way to preserve things because the compression that they employ for when people upload things, it looks hideous. And a lot of times the only copy of things even now are VHS masters. So then that's already like low resolution, and then it gets compressed even further, and it just like looks like crap, and it's got like macro block and all this other stuff going on. It's just it's a terrible way. And also it can just be gone. Like somebody just take it off.
Yeah.
And a lot of people and a lot of companies actually, they go through YouTube and they'll take away, you know, uploads of stuff that they don't let you buy. Like they're like, oh, you can't buy it from us, but you can't watch it either. Like it's just weird. Like the copyright thing is it's just messy, I feel like. And a lot of companies don't care if you can access their back catalog. They only care about what movies they have that are profitable. WB is like one of those companies. They have a WB archive, but they're very picky about what they release. And when they do release them, it's like bare bones, no extras, no nothing. Sometimes it's not the best transfer. You know, they just don't care. It's like they're throwing you like a crumb. Like here's, you know, nerds wanted here. You know, it's like the least effort they could possibly put into like a physical release. You know.
And it's just gonna keep getting better. That's yes, as we go, which is the true horror of the situation. So yeah, so keep buying hard copies, folks. They're good things to do.
Yeah.
But I think and we're running out of time, everybody. It's looking like I just wanted to really quickly say, Michelle, this was an awesome conversation, and we could talk for hours. I was, you know, honestly, there's a few questions I still have, so you know, I will reach out to you later. But thank you again for coming on and just
thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
This was absolutely wonderful. First of all, we just became best friends because Stephen King is also my favorite. And also Starship Troopers, grew up on that movie. I used to be able to tell it by heart. So yes, we're now best friends. For all of you out there who joined us this evening, thank you. I see you, Debbie, Bridget. I see you, Joey. See, we've got some hardcore ride or die fans out there. So Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Tell your friends, tell your colleagues, first Sunday of every month, unless something happens like Easter. Thank you for joining us on Beyond the Ghostlight, guys. Got anything you want to say, Nick?
No, I think it's great. And remember, everyone, if you just joined us and you missed most of the show, you can go to our website, go to the Catacombs, view past episodes, and we love to have you come live, and we love to have you watch our stuff afterwards.
Woohoo!
Yeah.
Everybody, we'll see you next month. Thanks for chatting.
Everyone.
Beyond the Ghostlight.